two. You had version. You had just one, right?
Yeah.
And then if it was
I wrote net out on everybody. Get in quick, 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 quick. Get in, get in, get in, get in.
Oh yeah. Okay, that really hurt on the ground.
Sophia! Do you put your name on it? Not here? No. Sam!
It's my favorite.
That's me. I'm zero.
I'm sorry, though. It's not my fault.
Bella! Ariella! Chris! Kaylin! Calvin! Somebody who didn't put a name! Oh, I put initials for you. Brian! Kelsey!
Without the quote, with just the question.
Alright, so first of all, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of very similar ages, may I draw your attention to the center ring? I mean, we should not compete with the cure. How can you compete with the cure? So, okay, so first of all, I would like you to give it up for the Sean Steele Quintet. Okay. These are our key masters, Sean, Haley, Caitlin, Adam, and Nadia. Bravo! Woo! Look at that. Would ya? Look at that, would ya? So, some very goods on this test. There's still a couple people that we want to get into the good category, so we're going to work on that. So what I would like you to do for about the next 10 to 15 minutes, you're going to go over your test. First of all, you're just going to, on the sheet, the things that are not solid, the things that are in parentheses and kind of painted, those are the questions you asked. So look through the test, see what you asked. See if you can figure out the correct answer. A, just by knowing that you missed it. B, talk to your neighbors, see if they can help you. If the like a good neighbor plan does not work, the key monsters, I only had 2 printed, so Sean and Nadia have the keys. Okay, they can tell you what the correct answer is. what I'd like you to do is your task for your notebook. So this is important because it is required. Ready? Required. Feel free to forge. In your notebook, you want to put down your analysis on at least 5 questions. And what the analysis is, basically put the subject of the question down, and then I missed this question because, and fill in the blank. Now the answer could be something, it should not be, I just didn't study enough. Okay, yeah. All right, you should have better analysis than that. But it could be phrasing in the question, thing is mean, somehow or another I thought the answer was C, and as I was transferring the letter C from my brain to the paper, it came out B. I hate when that happens. I changed the answer from correct to incorrect. Ooh, I hate when that happens. Okay, but see if you can just do that with at least 5 questions. See if you can do a kind of a self-analysis, which will help me, if we have a conversation, help you do better on the next one. Does that make sense? All right. So 10 to 15 minutes. Ready? Go. Break. Yes? Yes.
It's just going to be Spanish. Whoa.
Sir? You're in the queue.
Yeah,
Those deans, they get Yeah.
But you didn't get above. No, it's 42 to 47 is a A minus. Yes, that's how it works. It's a 47. You rounded it. No, I'm saying because you should have done no, but you're not. Wait, who got Isaac? Do you remember 8, right? Isaac.
I got a little bit below.
No, but no.
Number 3, I put B.
Isaac 90.
Yep.
What?
Did you get on?
Number 8? 8?
Did you get it right?
8, yeah. One, let's study with him and A. I remember that. That was, yeah. I remember that. 24. It was in 8. It was
Oh, I
in the
remember
PowerPoint. It was in the PowerPoint. I remember. Well, then you must have. Oh, the video plays PowerPoint like yeah. Hey.
I knew it was in
Come on, Zoe.
I remember telling
They didn't pass it. Well, they didn't pass it. I never passed it. Well, they never passed it. Except for this part. Wait, who makes grade? Like 60.
I put B, and I got it right.
You made to reread this
Did you go for B?
Actually, no.
What number?
I got number 3.
I was B.
I got all of the votes on the first one. So they're focused on internal
Mr. King.
Number 16.
Yes, I agree with
Number 8.
Jamie, I was gonna do that. I was gonna put
No.
And the For the one thing that went against his ideals, what's the negative purchase?
Wheat.
No.
Yeah,
But
No, I got 32 to 50.
I don't have
I know, I'm like bored and
Wait, Joey, what number? Yeah, but I want to get it. Joey.
Did you get 17? What number when you got 17? Nice, the same beat, right?
Oh, I got great. I was not.
Me too.
I played it okay, I got number 11.
Joey, we get this to go straight. We get it.
I number 11 is the stupidest thing that I did.
When I'm playing the game,
What'd you get? I gotta see, like the curve.
it's the way that
I got every excerpt thing wrong.
One
passage question there.
I wrote down the
I don't know to study. Like I studied for like 20 minutes. And it's like,
I lost it. You have to go first. I rewrote the edge for traffic. What have you
I did read the question. With the right
Just got that cool, you know. Son did so well, I named my son after him.
I got the same score as Adam. Wow.
No, wait. No.
Yes, sir. I'm just the worst. Well, good. Right now, we're using yeah, but all of them are the same.
Yeah, it's harder than APUSH.
They're not done yet.
It was so hard. I hated it. I did fine on the quiz and then I hated it. Oh my god, so hard.
types of business that we study, which we call acquisitions. Okay. Basically, neutrality law, okay. I've never heard about neutrality law. But about the alien citizen.
Yes, exactly.
Mademoiselle, how may I be of service? So what is the answer? But so remember this, we're also okay. Which of the following best exemplifies Jefferson embraced the idea of right the answer? So what? So you have to also take So does the excerpt show you something on how in fact the insert is fit? How in effect So he never studied that. I did the study guide. He thought about he raised the idea, but he never tried to slow down the process because he didn't want to
No, I realized you don't have to read I just read the chapter 7 with my knowledge. I have to read chapter 8. For chapter 8, I just got the she did chapter 7, and then I read chapter 7 and then I went to chapter 8, and I read like the motherhood topic and shit like that, right next to it, and then right before the class came in, I sat down and that helped. Wait, did you get any of those questions that like you got the right answer but then you changed it?
Every time, I don't want it to be actually decide which one.
I don't know what I got with.
What did you get with that?
I don't know what I got with. It's okay. We got a 9. They're always
I would go and
Adam, on the first passage, I got all of them. I did the exact same thing here. And I just find the one that
Well, I mean, let's say no. Then back to California. I just buy it
all of these things got all right, and then I changed it.
TBT Davies.
I was deciding between this one, and then I marked the answer was good. I was deciding I read this article online.
That's improvement.
Yeah, always do your instincts. Yeah, exactly. Don't say it. I wasn't. I should do.
so next time you do like after, you're never gonna go over it. Do your head.
No, like if you make a mistake, like Yeah,
like if it's all these like,
no, but if like if you have a feeling like don't go against your instinct.
So hard on it. I put Spain and then
No, this is different. This one on the last quiz I made so many mistakes. On the quiz yesterday I did so many mistakes that I went back and I wrote 80 times and got no 6 and she wrote no it doesn't. Rich kid was like laughing at me. Rich kid was like I never got a I thought that was the very first test I got a 9. I thought I'm like, I'm gonna do it well. It was tough. I thought I understood. Oh, you have it right now? Yeah. Okay. All right.
No, they wanted to create a national Hamilton Park was planning to create a national test. Remember, they completed our like on time every time. And she didn't know there's that shit. I paid $10 for like this high school course. So like, this is gonna be she's like playing it all like this on company. They wanted to create a national test. So my grade just reflected what I know. Like I know so much with my grade net, so that I paid off every time. So other states, I do other countries in low too. I do fine. And actually, it gets like I get like 70, 60 downgrade. I like then you have nothing just like but I under I countries. I was in a class. I would get like 90. They have a national debt because she grows on their wild. I have homework quiz tomorrow. I think I did on the first one. You like I even did my homework. Yeah.
Miss Kim, tell Miss Kim no last time. No homework.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm just
Miss Kim was so much better than me.
I know, but some Miss Kim high
I
don't even grade it. Doctor grades like numbers 1 and 2, and then Miss Green grades so whatever. I forgot who graded that. All I remember was the person wrote no it doesn't. That's probably why I missed it.
like the way Dr. graded, I got it. It was on the test, right? On the test.
If you
I got perfect.
for her projects, if you do what she writes on the rubric, you get a C.
All right. Pass them forward. Pass them forward. Pass the test forward. Pass the test. Pass the test forward. Pass the test forward. Pass the test forward. Pass the test forward. Yes, you will pick up the keys. Thank you very much, OP Master. Pass the test forward. Pass the test forward. Pass the test forward. Pass the test forward. Pass them forward again. Pass them this way. Pass them this way. Then this way. 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 And this way.
Yeah, we can't do it.
Test once. Test twice. Test thrice. All right, so if you need more time on the test to look it over, behind that white fan, there is a bin that has a 6 on it. Guess what is in the bin that is marked 6? Your tests. Okay, so if you need to come in, look over things more carefully, feel free to forward. Okay. Just come in with your test paper, take it out of the bin. In the bin on the far left, I'll have the keys, so you can check things out. But if you do come in, what I would like you to do is As you're going over the test, try and come up with kind of an overall where you think any sort of problems are. And then before you go, I would like to have a conversation with you. And then we can see what we can do for the next test. And why is that important? Because we have only 2 more major tests in the semester. Yeah. Unit 4 and Unit 5. Now there'll be a couple other things. I might have kind of a mini test or something like that on part of Unit 6 on the day of the final, along with our notebook check. But the last 2 major chunks are Unit 4 and Unit 5. Okay? And the Unit 4 test is the 22nd of this month.
Ooh.
So Ryan.
Are we going to have a midterm at the end of the semester?
We're gonna have a test on the day of the final, which kind of. But I may have something, but it's at this point count on the Unit 4 and Unit 5. Okay. All right. So I haven't done my full analysis on the results yet, but I did notice that even the grades overall were higher. There was an area that was a little bit problematic, and that's these questions with the stimulus. So I think there's two issues with them. Is they are sometimes a little bit big picture, and they're not necessarily about the documents, but more about you having to think a little bit. So I think we need more practice with them. In your cram book, there are some practice stimulus questions. You might want to try those. I'll try and set up a key so you can see if you get them right. I'll also try and see if I've got, if I can maybe do a couple practices before the next test. The other thing you're going to find on the stimulus is that a lot of them are based on big themes, and we don't know the big themes yet because we haven't studied enough American history. I believe if you saw some of these same questions at the end of the year, after experiencing the entire theme, you might do a little bit better on them. So it's because one of A, they're looking for facts, but B, they are looking for themes, and so that's the part which it's going to be kind of an accumulation as things go on. Yeah.
Are you going to be grading the Unit 3 essays also?
I will get them done. Yes, but when they get done. But the way the grades will go is that they're an independent 50 points. Okay. All right. So All right. So let us cleanse ourselves of Unit 3. So a deep cleansing breath. You didn't cleanse yourself very well. Okay. Anyway. Now Unit 4, as far as its themes, it's kind of a mixed bag. Some people like to call the time period covered by Unit 4 as the Jacksonian era. That puts a lot of weight on really one concept. The emergence, yes sir?
Is the Civil War this year?
No.
Next year?
Yes. The calling it the Jacksonian era puts a lot of weight in only one of the topics though. The emergence of a more true democracy. And when I say more true, note I'm not saying most true. We have not reached anything like full democracy even by the end of this unit. But we will move from a more elite-dominated system to one in which more people get the right to vote. But is it everybody get the right to vote? No. We still have quite a bit of distance before we get that far. But the theme, the idea, of people having the right to vote, in this case, common men getting the right to vote, is now established. But by calling it Jackson, you miss some other things. You miss a huge transition in the American economy. At the beginning of this era, it is the era of Republican idealism, the era of the farmer being preeminent, and Jefferson, he loved the farmer. He said the farmer was awesome, and when he said, "Hey, farmer, you're awesome," they said, "Okay, I'll vote for you." Okay, but by the end of this era, the farmer is no longer the most dominant person in the American economy. So there's going to be this transition. So some other people call this era the era of the market revolution. So far you have two revolutions. You have a revolution of democracy, and you have a revolution of the economy. But that doesn't cover everything either. Because it also is an era where when we have that market change, it transforms what happens as far as our society, how we work, how we earn our money. And then, in many ways, it created a society that was kind of detrimental to the most common of workers. And so the third thing, there's going to be a reform movement to try and improve people's lives. So the third revolution, a revolution of reform. And then there's a fourth theme. Now the fourth theme is less about a change, it's more about a setup. And Sam kind of hit on exactly what the setup is going to be. As we start to develop a more true democracy, a glaring misstep in what had happened when the United States emerged is going to become just glaringly apparent. And that is the issue of slavery. A conflict will start to develop north and south. And so what we'll do at the end of this unit is we are going to basically study the Southern culture. And then in our next unit, we are going to react to it. Okay? So you have this kind of clear as far as what we're kind of doing this time. So in a sense, Jacksonian American, reform, sectionalism, culture, and economics. So we start with the transforming of an economy. And I use the word transform. What type of essay does this beg you to write if you were going to write one? Just simply based on the title. It's a change over. Yeah, or cause and effect. Cause and effect or change over time. Okay? It could be. So it's what we're going to talk about here is that transition from Mr. Jefferson's "Oh, I love you, farmer" American society to his rival. Okay, his rival Alexander Hamilton had thought we needed to develop a more commercial American society, and that is indeed the society that will emerge. We are going to have an American industrial revolution. We are going to have an American industrial revolution. So once again, going back to that theme, transforming your economy. Well, to properly understand a transformation, you have to know what the before is, and what happens, and then thus is what the end product is. So the beginning, a more agrarian society. Okay. The initial Industrial Revolution happens in Britain. They start their Industrial Revolution at about 1750. Now remember, the United States is part of Britain at that time. What are we doing? What are we doing while they're industrializing in London and Liverpool and Manchester? What are we doing?
Farming.
We're farming. Okay. And what are we doing for the revolution? I mean, pardon me, for the empire, for this industrial revolution. What are we providing? Food and not they provide the cloth. We provide maybe the cotton, the raw materials. Okay, so back then it was really before cotton. It was more they more produced woolen textiles. So, but we provided other raw materials for like shipbuilding and other products. We were the raw material provider. They were the ones that made the products. Even after we go independent, we're going to be slow to embrace the mechanization. The reasons for this, first is land. You see, in 18th century America, what was considered the measure of your wealth? How were you considered to be wealthy as opposed to not wealthy? Yeah.
How much land do you have?
How much land do you have? And so if land is available and land makes you, in effect, seem like you're wealthy, are you thinking of other ways of making money so much? If you can just go off and get land, and land, my goodness, you're going to be a landowner. A landowner! A landowner. So landowning was so exciting that it distracts you from other ways of making money. Secondly, before we have an immigration flood in the 1840s and 1850s, labor is a scarce resource. So if you're industrializing, one of the things that is usually a key to industrialization is you have a cheap labor source. Okay? In British cities, they actually have cities. They have all these people, poor people, desperate for jobs. Well, people desperate for jobs is a labor source. Here in America, okay, the American labor sources were either A, being put toward another thing, tobacco farming in the South, or in the North, they just weren't there. If you were, the cities weren't really even cities in the North. What you basically were doing in the North is you were hoping to make enough money so you could go off and do what? Buy land. And then you could go become a farmer. Yay! So you didn't have these big pockets of people sitting around waiting for a job. Okay? That number of people was relatively small. So since that number is small, are they going to be cheap? No. Thirdly, the money is difficult to obtain. We had just begun to create a money system with the Bank of North America and then the Bank of the United States. We were just in the beginning of trying to organize having money available for commercial purposes. In Britain, they've been doing it for centuries. So in Britain, they got money.
We got money.
We don't got the money. We don't got the capital. Okay? We don't have the workers. And we're distracted by land. Because of this, even though we did have raw materials, we're giving them to the British. We're not utilizing them. We're not looking at rivers and saying, whoa, power! That isn't the way we thought yet. Well, the final thing that kind of prevents the United States from really developing is Britain itself. Britain was already producing cheap goods. And so if you want the goods, you imported them from Britain. If we started making them here, well, we would just get started, right? We'd be in the beginning. And if you're at the beginning, are you going to be able to sell them as cheaply as someone who's been doing it for a long time? No. So they had that advantage. The other advantage the British had is they had the technology. They knew how to make an efficient factory, and they weren't telling. It was a capital crime to export British textile technology. And thus, they were trying to keep it under lock and key. This will make it so that it's not until the middle of the 19th century, nearly 100 years later, that the United States has developed to be a commercial exporting power, where we would export more from our factories than we will from our farms. That we will produce more in our factories than we will produce in our farms. It will take us about another 100 years. We are late to the party. Sir.
But didn't Britain also have like a lot less land, so it would make it easier for them to export more goods from their factories than it would from their farms?
Possibly. But they had to industrialize first before that can happen. And we were still, we're still going, whoa, cool, farm, wheat, yay. Not realizing the amount of money you can make with manufactured goods, which was far more than you can make with commercial. You make more from factory goods than you can from agriculture. So, let us talk about the textile industry a little bit and our competition with the British. Okay? So textiles and our competition with the British. So to begin this competition, we got to unlock the secret. We got to unlock the key. We got to unlock the technology that the British had. Okay? They had it, we didn't. We want it. So how we could get it? Who says steal it? We steal it. Okay? Our hero of sorts, our industrial espionage spy, is Slater. Sam Slater. Okay? Samuel Slater is in effect an industrial spy. He is going to memorize the plans for how to make a British industrial textile factory. And he's going to have it all in his brain. He's going to get on a boat. He's going to come to America. He's going to say, America, I know how to make a British textile factory. Anybody want to give me money? And somebody says, yes, I'll give you money. And because of this, he is able to build, okay, the first efficient spinning machinery in America. So the Industrial Revolution, the original Industrial Revolution looks like this, people. We could make thread. Ooh. American technology. Okay? The iPod of its day. Okay? Maybe Samsung had it first, okay? But Apple will steal it and make it awesome. Okay? Alright, so, anyway. So, according to the patent arguments, it's the other way, according to the patent arguments, Anyway, so the American Industrial Revolution basically takes place in these textile mills. They will start to cause a change that principally happens in the north. It doesn't happen in the south so much because the soil there is pretty good. It grew that resource known as cotton. People made money from the cotton, so they were less likely to start industrializing there. But in the north, there's kind of a push-pull factor. The soil is so gosh darn poor. In order to farm in the north, you're constantly pulling out rocks, you're constantly having to tend the soil, and then it barely grows anything. The farmers in the Northeast, they move to places like upstate New York where they stare at the ground and, oh my God, a forest of wheat grows. They start competing against places like New York, and they're growing things really, really easily, and you're growing things very, very difficultly. Who's making more money? New York is. And so you start to go, well, wait a minute, could I do something else? And the something else is using another resource that was available, water, for power. Water and power, right? Okay. So they are going to basically start to move away from this system of farming and toward manufacturing. So, at this stage in the game, round one, ding! Britain is winning pretty much everywhere, but there's one tiny itty-bitty little advantage that the Americans have. Natural resources. Water? Oh, we got water. Not here in California, mind you, but this wasn't part of the United States yet. So, we had water. We could use it as power. Also, we had an advantage, though a small one. Where is the cotton? It's in the south. It's close. Now, can they get it from the south too? Yes, they can. They just have to cross an ocean. But do we have a little bit of an advantage? Yeah, a little bit. So we have the natural resource advantage. But everything else, who's got the advantage? Britain does. Okay? So if you were going to look at American versus British advantages, the British had the advantage of cheap labor, cities teeming with people. They've got the advantage of cheap interest rates because their banking system has been around for so long. They've got maybe a tie of the fact that they can get the cheap American cotton because we sell it so gosh darn cheap. So, with the British holding the edge, American manufacturing, for its first almost decade and a half, very, very slow. We developed this tiny little infinitesimal, itty bitty baby baby little American industry. Little baby chick. Okay. Tiny little baby American industry. And it's going to basically stay that way until about 1807. But in 1807, we're going to have one of those catalyst type events. Okay, something that isn't directly related to industrialization, but will affect industrialization. You see, in 1807, the British were seizing American ships. Okay? Taking American cargoes. Seizing American sailors. Along with French. But we're keying on the British here. So what does Thomas Jefferson do? He says, oh my goodness, I don't have a navy. How can I combat big bad Britain? I know. Embargo. And so he pushes through the Embargo Act, which basically says we're not going to buy British goods. No British goods. Well, what this does is it makes it so that if we can't import our manufacturing goods from Britain, what do we have to do? We got to do it ourselves.
Isn't that like kind of like Hamilton's campaign?
It is. It's ironically Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson that implements having an industrial system in America by accident. He was doing it because he didn't want to go to war. But the effect is to take little baby American industry and go, oh, here you go. And it becomes it becomes nurtured, a little American toddler. Okay? This toddling little American industry that will sell American manufactured goods. And this will continue through the beginning of James Madison's administration with the Non-Intercourse Act, with the declaration of war against Great Britain, War of 1812. All that time, the number of British imports into the United States is limited, and since the imports are limited, American industry continues to go. But then, something awful happens. And this is going to sound weird. The awful thing, the war ends. I know that's not a usual statement. We don't usually say, oh my God, the war ended. But for American industry, this is awful. Because what happens is at the end of the war, the Americans had been seizing British merchant ships. They seized like some 1,350 of them. They had made it so Lloyd's of London had no longer insured British shipping across the sea. So the British are not exporting so much, and if you're not exporting so much, and you're still producing, you have warehouses full of goods piling up, and piling up, and piling up. So you get this giant wave of goods. Okay, now the war's over, what are you going to do with those goods? Into the American market. Now these goods, if you've got a surplus, what happens to the price of those goods? It's going to go down. Okay, so you've got these really cheap goods. Now, baby American industry, is it going to be very efficient? So is it going to be producing things very cheaply? So what's going to happen? You have these expensive American goods and these cheap British goods coming in. So what's going to happen to little baby American industry? Bye-bye, baby. It's going to be crushed, okay, by the British dumping their goods on our markets. So interestingly enough, it will be another Republican. Okay, Jefferson did it by accident. James Madison does it on purpose. James Madison is going to realize that we have this baby little industry. And if we don't do anything to protect it, it's going to die. And so what Madison will call for is a tariff. Now, not an itty-bitty little money-making tariff. When you guys think back, remember when I first started talking about what the British had done in the Molasses Act? Remember the Molasses Act? The Molasses Act had been passed because the Americans were off trading with the Spanish and the French West Indies. And to make them behave themselves and trade only with the British, we put this huge tax up on the French goods and the Spanish goods. It was a tax to make us change our behavior. The tariff of 1860 is similar. What it does is it slams this tariff on the imported goods, basically increasing their cost. So now, these goods are expensive, more expensive than the American good. And so now, let's say with the tariff, something costs like $11, and without and the American good costs about $10, what you gonna buy? America! So basically what the tariff does is it builds up this wall of protection for baby. It will allow American industry to grow up. Does that make sense? So this becomes our policy throughout the 1820s to have these high tariffs to protect American industry. So now, the Americans are going to basically improve. Now, how are we going to improve? We're going to steal again. We're going to look at what the British are doing. We're going to go, oh, that's really good. They're going to take it, and then we're going to make it better. So the Americans will go, oh, that's a really cool loom. Yeah. Then we take their loom, we go home, and we go, let's make it bigger. Yeah, and let's make it work with fewer people. And so with these technological improvements, we're going to produce more with fewer workers. Now we're starting to compete. Secondly, we're going to start to work on the issue of workers. We're going to try several experiments on how to make it so that Britain did not have the advantage as far as workers were concerned. Flew through that. Are you with me so far? Good? Okay, Andrew's with me. Anybody else? Oh, is there one more?
Yeah.
Bad teacher. So one of the experiments that the Americans are going to do to improve our the price of our workers is an experiment that takes place in a little city in Massachusetts known as Lowell. The experiment will be known as the Waltham-Lowell system, but most people today just simply call it the Lowell system. It was created by a guy by the name of Francis Cabot Lowell. And what he's going to do to try and get cheap workers for his factories is he's going to employ farm girls. Okay? Nice, wholesome farm girls. Now, in order to do this, obviously, you got to appeal to the parents of the farm girls. The farm girls' parents aren't going to want them to go work in some dirty, disgusting factory Thomas Jefferson for years had been saying that, you know, we don't want our system here in America to be like their system in Britain. We don't want to be that country. We don't want to have a whole bunch of poor living in slums and things like that. Okay? We don't want that in America. So what they're going to do in Lowell is that in order to get these workers, they're going to promise the parents that they are going to build these dormitories for the girls to live. And these girls will be supervised by matrons that will make sure that they go to church on Sundays, that in their off hours they'll be encouraged to write poetry, sing songs, collect their work together in journals. It was going to be almost utopian. But to keep it cheap, the women would not be allowed to unionize. They would not be allowed to get together to try and get a higher wage or better working conditions. They would be forbidden from doing so. Now at first, the experiment seemed to be working. If you read the journals of women at the time, they will report that working in these factories gave them a certain amount of independence that women were not used to at that time. Usually what would happen is women would move from basically being within a household dominated by their parents, moving into a household dominated by their husband. But with this system, women were given some independence. Yes, they were supervised by matrons, but relatively independent. It also gave women earning power. They were able to save money for dowries. They were able to contribute back to their households to help their parents pay off their mortgages. And so again, initially, and note I've said that 4 times, initially, it seems like the experiment is a success. Even Thomas Jefferson will say so. Thomas Jefferson, who had feared industrialization for America, will comment about how the American system of manufacturing is so much better. We republicanized it. We made it so that it's kinder, it's gentler, it's a nice form of manufacturing as opposed to Britain and what they do to their people. But the experiment will eventually fail. Problems will be good old-fashioned capitalist competition. You see, as we start to get larger populations in our cities, largely due to immigration, there's cheaper labor. And the competition will hire the cheaper labor. And thus, to compete, the Lowell mills will start on cutting wages, increasing hours, making it so that the women had to work not 1 loom, but 2 looms and 3 looms all at one time. The working conditions are getting worse. Then, we get a panic. The Panic of 1819, followed later by the Panic of 1837. These economic downturns will make the Lowell mills cut their wages even more and increase the hours and make the women work even harder. So what do the women do? They form a union. What does the union do? It goes on strike. And so what does the company do? Yeah. It turns to immigrant, mainly Irish, labor and virtue. So in effect, it's like that last page of Animal Farm. The animals looked at the humans, and then to the pigs, and then to the pigs, and then to the humans, and they could not tell the difference. Our manufacturing had become just the same. Yeah.
Is that why a lot of Irish people have the last name?
I don't know, maybe, because a lot of times it was what you were where you worked with the thing that you that would become your surname.
And the last name.
What's that? Now, one last note, and this is kind of a comment I wanted you to kind of be aware of as you're reading your textbook. I thought your textbook did an overly idealized view of what was happening in Lowell. It did not really talk about the conditions. And so the textbook kept saying women, women, women. It's not completely accurate. Your workers were really children. They're girls. Secondly, it doesn't really mention the hours. It doesn't mention the looms and all that stuff that they had to do. And so I want you to look at this picture and then focus on her hands. They're swollen. They're puffy. This is someone who, at this very young age, is already going to have repetitive motion problems, issues that are going to affect her for the rest of her life. So meanwhile, some additional shifts in the American economy. In the 1820s, we start to see the emergence of what we call the outwork system. As Americans' ability to earn money largely from their farm products increases, their standard of living increases, people want more stuff, okay? Now, initially, if you wanted like a pair of shoes, you went down to the cobbler, and the cobbler cobbled a pair of shoes for you. It was an art form, okay? And those shoes were probably a wee bit expensive. But as the demand for these shoes goes up, these cobblers start figuring out that in order to fulfill the demand, in order to be able to do more shoes, they had to be able to figure out how to make shoes more quickly. And they realized that every part of shoemaking does not require skill. That there are some aspects of shoemaking that are fairly easy to do. And so what they're going to do is they're going to hire people and maybe even work at their own houses, where you would say, okay, you don't need much skill to like cut the pattern of the shoe in the leather. So you would go to these workers, you would say, for a fee, you have to cut me 25 patterns today. Outwork, okay? I then bring it back to my shop and take all those patterns and cobble them together. And then finally, I go to a second group of workers and I say, okay, now you need to put the heels on these things, okay? Here are the heels, here's a hammer, here's the shoe, okay? Do that. Now to do that, putting on the heel or cutting out the pattern, does that require a lot of skill? No. So am I going to pay you a lot of money to do that? No. So since I'm not paying a lot of money for it to get done and I'm getting a lot of it done, it's going to reduce the cost of my product. That means I can sell more of it. I'm also going to help create a new class of wage workers in America, where people, rather than being so much working in town as artisans with a skill, they're going to work for less money unskilled wage workers. Emerging at about the same time would be what we would call the modern factory system. The difference between it and outwork is that factory is done all under one roof. One of the first places we see this in America is in Cincinnati. Cincinnati became kind of a central location for pork slaughterhouses. So many pork slaughterhouses that they will later call Cincinnati Porkopolis. Now, in Cincinnati, they developed what you could best describe as a disassembly line. Okay? You put the pork thing, the hog, on a belt, and you send it on down the line, and as it goes down the line, people conduct various disassemblies of this pork. Okay, you get what I'm saying, right? Yeah. All right. So with this system, they're now going to be able to slaughter thousands of hogs in Cincinnati. Okay, but all done under one roof. In effect, it is a pork factory. Eventually, by the 1830s, we get a change in our factory system. We start to no longer rely on a location next to a river. And instead of using water for power, we are going to use steam. This bringing in of mechanization, we call the mineral-based economy. And not only will it be machine-driven, it will also make products out of metal. We are now into a manufacturing that's a little bit more like what we do now. Machining metal parts. Two of the first companies to utilize this were the McCormick Reaper plant and the Samuel Colt revolver factory. McCormick developed a new form of reaper. This is the way you bring in your harvest. In the old days, you have your scythe and you slice down your crop, okay, one swing at a time. What the McCormick Reaper does is it uses a mechanical driving wheel that will spin a blade that you can basically drag across your field and cut down far more than you can with a swipe of a scythe. Secondly, Samuel Colt. He will develop a gun that no longer just fired one bullet at a time, but instead had a chamber that rotated 6 different bullets. You built this on an assembly line in his plant, with metal parts fabricated at the factory. We are now truly industrialized. That's the McCormick Reaper. Those are the blades that spin. Let's do that again. One more time. At this point, we see the emergence of what some people call American, or sometimes they call it Yankee, ingenuity. The United States, rather than being the follower, rather than being the spy, rather than being the let's see what you're doing and stealing it, the United States will become the leader. The United States will be on the cutting edge. the United States will become like the Silicon Valley of technology. Really? I'm playing too much, I'm sorry. The Americans will pioneer the development of machine tools. One of the first in a long list of these things is going to be the cotton gin, or the cotton engine, who is credited to a guy by the name of Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney is going to develop a machine that is going to easily remove seeds from cotton. Now, why this was important was that until this device comes into real play, cotton was a very luxury good. And the reason why it was a luxury good is that it was so expensive to make because it took so long to pull the seeds out of the cotton, besides even having to do the labor of picking the cotton. And so since it was laborious, it was expensive. But if you remove half the labor problem, you make it so that the seeds come out easily with a machine. And now the labor is only the picking of the cotton. And you have this labor supply in the South. Well, all of a sudden, cotton becomes profitable. Some argue that this invention might have actually preserved the slave system in America, that it was actually dying out at the time the cotton gin was invented. George Washington was pulling more and more of his land out of tobacco production and into wheat. Wheat would not require slave labor because it's less labor intensive. But with the cotton gin, the dependence on labor for picking the cotton is great, and thus the slave system is reversed. Anyway, Eli Whitney is also credited with the concept of interchangeable parts. This is something that some people don't get. Up until Eli Whitney, for the most part, when you manufactured something, you manufactured a whole thing. So let's say you were in Samuel Colt's factory, you are manufacturing, putting together, and machining one gun at a time. What Eli Whitney geniuses out is that you don't have to do the whole. You can do the parts. You can have one section of your factory completely dedicated into making, let's say, the barrels of the gun. Another section of your factory completely dedicated to making the triggers of the gun. Another section of your company completely dedicated to the stocks. And only in the end do you put them all together. You can use one set of batches of triggers with another batch of stocks, another batch of barrels, interchangeably. All the same. It turned out that when you start doing that, you start making things all the same. You can do that same thing we did earlier as far as division of labor. You can make it cheaper, you can make it faster, and you can make money. So
before, like, one gun would be different from the other?
Yes. Slightly, but yes. If that makes sense. Each was its own product. Now, they are pretty much the same. Now, by the way, Eli Whitney did not do this very well. Other people do it better than him, but he did it first. He also got a huge contract from the United States government to make rifles using this concept, and so he also got rich. Basically, what we now get is American innovations that start changing everything. For one, John Deere will develop a steel plow. Now again, a plow. We've had plows forever. We've been making iron plows almost forever. But what John Deere does is he makes that same product out of steel. And what that steel thing does is it cuts through the earth faster. It cuts through earth that used to not be cuttable. And all of a sudden, plowing takes about half the time. And thus, America increases its wheat harvest. And thus, flour becomes 10% of all of American exports. Another guy by the name of Richard Garrett is going to take that same idea, the power loom, and he's going to go, well, maybe we can make it faster. And he does. He makes it nearly twice as fast. Nearly twice as fast makes it that so you can produce almost twice as much. Once again, making the United States more competitive with Great Britain. Eventually, using this interchangeable parts, sometimes known as the American system of manufacturing, the United States is going to start on creating products like Remington rifles and Singer sewing machines that will be imported by the British. The British are now importing our stuff. And if the British are now importing our stuff, what has just happened? The student has surpassed the teacher. The student has become the master. Threw a whole bunch at you, but it was all kind of stuck together as one story, so that's why I kept it going, horribly. What I'd like you to do, well, I don't want to click this, I'll get yelled at if I don't get to that in a minute. Some more stretches. All right, you're good. All right. So now I want you to do a thinky thing. The idea is to describe the emergence of the United States as an industrialized nation, but don't worry about that part. What I'm really interested in is what do you think are the three most important points? So I want you to make a judgment. Looking at the story that I just told you, what are the key points? What are the turning points here that helps the United States pull this thing off, where, as Casey had told us, that the student had become the teacher. Okay, the student had become the master. Okay, what three would you choose? What are the turning points? You can bullet point this if you wish. I'll give you a moment. In a moment, you can share. Do your own first. Send Andrew's move.
Oh yeah, you have to start over with acquaintances.
So if you're, so in order, yeah.
I read it. You did a good thing. You tried to get them for a team for past
How that happen? What were kind of the three main things that allowed that to happen? Does that make sense? Okay, why don't you turn to your White House right now? Sandra, Kate came late. She might not have a
To chop around. And it's really funny because they shape you with a real light. I know, I know, but it's boring.
All right, so wrap it up. Wrap it up. Wrap it up. Wrap it up. Okay, so. It's actually Looney Tunes, but hey. Okay, wait, time. Everybody, brains.
Okay, so I said to start off, Sam is later because without him going over and copying and memorizing, it would have never started. And then next, I kind of skipped a little bit towards the end where they had division of labor in the outwork system, because that really led to mass production, within which also led to my third point, which is Eli Whitney and the other innovators, because also mass production.
Awesome. Okay. Brenda.
I said the three most important things were the Americans basing their technology off the already existing technology in Europe, tariff of 1816, and the concept of interchangeable parts.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, I have to do one more concept. So let's just do that concept. So let's just do a nice breath. Okay. So now I want to transition very quickly. Obviously, the transformation of the economy is huge. It changes everything as far as American society. what I want to focus in right now is what did it do to the workers? Okay? So, in effect, with this industrial system, we are going to invent or have more what we would call wage workers in America. And basically, in this factory system, you're going to have more people under the control of an employer. Now, your typical person in America before this era was a farmer, and who was their boss? They were their boss, okay? They got to decide when they woke up. They got to decide what they were going to do, okay? Now, they'd be self-driven, and you'd be better to get up earlier to get more done or stuff like that, but it's a self thing, right? It's not boss telling me what to do, right? Now it's boss. Workers are going to now face very difficult conditions on long hours. And long hours, what we're talking about is 12, 14, 15-hour days. Now remember Lowell, the girls were able to write poetry and songs and whatnot in their off time. Not a lot of off time if you're working 12, 13, 14-hour days, huh? Wages are low. How low? How low can you go? There was nobody, there was no government that was going to say you have a minimum wage or you have a living wage. Instead, how much an employer paid was based on how little they can get away with. As long as someone's showing up for work, that's the wage. Okay? Once nobody shows up, well then they have to up it, don't they? So the idea is basically govern who's going to walk in the door. If I can get people to walk in the door, then that's what I'll pay. They used to call this Ricardo's iron law of wages. Okay? The lowest amount that you can pay and still have somebody show up. Small meals. You're going to have a small, tiny little break. I don't want you to spend a lot of time on break because I want you eating so much, I want you to get sleepy on the job. Okay? But who's controlling it here? Bosses. They were working in conditions poorly ventilated. Now you're going, okay, whatever. Maybe this classroom is poorly ventilated, which it is. But imagine now this classroom, okay? The doors nailed shut, okay? Windows slammed shut, okay? And we don't open them because we don't want any dirt or dust to get in on our product. Now we're running machinery, which heats things up, right? And the machinery is putting all this dust in the air. Okay, how much dust? Well, think of when you clean out your dryer after you've done a load. You take out all that lint. Well, that's the stuff in the air that you're breathing in. Okay, it's not being vented out. So where is it going? Into your lungs. For coal miners, they say they have this thing called black lung. For textile workers, it was white lung. Things are poorly lit. Again, my horrible classroom. You can't see why did they have things? Why did they have things that were so poorly lit? Because the lighting was an open flame, and you have all these little filamenty things in the air. Do you want a lot of open flames? No, because it can cause fire. So now it's the dead of winter, okay, when you were hoping for that machinery to be heating you up, but it's not enough because it's cold out there. Well, guess what? We're not going to put anything into the big fireplace because if we put a big thing in the big fireplace, it can cause fire. So, again, conditions, not so nice. Additionally, socially, technological advances basically threaten some of the old artisan occupations. You used to be able to be kind of the head of the class, really cool kid in town, if you were a shoemaker or a hatter or a printer. But now, You work in a shoe factory. You work in a printing factory. You work at Kinko's. Okay? It is not the same as being the artisan who's the only game in town and can charge you good money and has good social stature. Instead now, you are, well, a worker working for a wage for little money. How low can you go? So what do the workers do? Well, it's basically two things: on the job and off the job. If the boss controls your whole life on the job, what do you try and do when you're off the job? You try and create something as separate from your work culture as possible. You want to make sure you're completely separate. You don't want anything to do with what's happening on the job when you're off the job. Now this is different. Back in farmer days, your work and your home were basically the same thing. Now it's what's happening at work stays at work. It's like Vegas, okay? And you and off the job, okay, you create this separate, distinct culture. On the job, workers start to form unions. Now, this is difficult. We're going to talk about the difficulty in a moment. But basically, as one worker, do nothing. I go up to the boss and I say, I don't want to teach 5 periods, I want to teach 4. Okay? And the boss goes, well, wait, there's about 12 other people who want your job. So if you don't want to teach 5, have a nice day. But if we can get everybody, hey, let's make it a 4, okay, so we only have to work 4 periods, people. All right? 4 periods, no more 6. Let's do 4. Yes. That's great. So it's only 2 periods a day for y'all, right? Good. Yes. Okay, so we all do it. You might be able to get it done. Safety, power, and numbers. Got it? These early labor unions will strike, and sometimes they will have success. One example of success is in 1840, there were labor protests in St. Louis, which will secure for many of the workers in St. Louis an unheard of 10-hour workday. This will inspire the President of the United States, Martin Van Buren, to establish a similar workday for federal employees. But I think of it kind of as a tug-of-war here. Anytime you see any sort of gain by the workers, you'll see the companies basically gain something back. And what happens in reaction to these labor protests in these strikes is, in New York, the New York State Supreme Court is going to rule. It is important to the best interests of society that the price of labor be left to regulate itself. Now, in case you're not sure what that means, it means unions are a conspiracy. You as a group, that's a conspiracy. You are basically working together to basically conspire against me, the factory owner. You are conspiring to take my money away. You're conspiring, and by taking my money away and paying you more, what's going to happen to the price of my goods? It's going to go up. So what your conspiracy is also doing, it's increasing the price of goods. And if it increases the price of goods, what about those poor consumers? They're going to have to pay more. Conspiracy, conspiracy, conspiracy. Y'all are trying to rob society of properly priced goods. It should be natural. Okay? You show up, supply and demand. If there are a lot of people out there want your job, I should be allowed to pay you as little as possible. That's natural. That's regulating itself. That's not allowing these conspiracies to come in and mess everything up. New York State Supreme Court. Got it? All right. In closing. The workers will then argue that in effect what was developing here in the United States is that we are creating a money aristocracy and workers are slaves to it. Workers would promote what they called the labor theory of value, that the price of a good should reflect the labor required to make it. And the income derived of said item should mainly go to the laborer who created it, not mainly to a factory owner. Workers will eventually start to win support, basically comparing their lives as workers to being somewhat like that of Southern slaves. Now, Southern slave owners love this because they would basically now start calling Northerners wage slaves and use it as a way of defending the slave system. With this ideology out there, in 1836 there are going to be numerous strikes where they're basically going to say that these strikes are kind of like the American Revolution. The American Revolution rebelled against an aristocracy of birth, an aristocracy of the wealthy. Now, we are rebelling against an aristocracy of capital, an aristocracy of the business owner. Supporting that view, in 1842, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, in a case called Commonwealth versus Hunt, they will rule that labor has the right to organize themselves into unions. It is huge. It is groundbreaking. It is still cited as one of the original pinnacles of labor being allowed to organize. The problem is, not every state and not every court agreed. And many courts will continue to issue injunctions forbidding strikes based on conspiracy. And so basically for the rest of the 1800s, this is going to be the battle. Capital versus labor. When next we meet, we will talk about additional parts of American society in this era. Y'all have a fabulously wonderful Super Tuesday.